The final assessment. Peiper's discovery wasn't just about fuel, but industrial warfare's nature. Victory belonged to whoever produced most. Petroleum, steel, aluminum. Germany never had a chance. The final irony. American forces cataloging abandoned German equipment at La Gleize found 39 perfect tanks abandoned solely for lack of fuel. Major Robert Harrison's salvage report noted, fuel required 8,000 gallons. Classification. Minimal source. Local reserve time, 4 hours. What was impossible for Germans, 8,000 gallons to save their best tanks, was beneath American notice. A minor request using local reserves exceeded Kampfgruppe Peiper's peak strength. Conclusion: the ocean versus the drops. This was Peiper's discovery at Honsfeld. Not just that America had more fuel, but that American abundance operated on a scale making German scarcity irrelevant. The war was over when American industrial capacity mobilized. Honsfeld revealed what had been true since 1942. Germany fought the impossible, measuring defeat in gallons, while America measured victory in oceans. The Tiger tank at La Gleize Museum sits with fuel gauge on empty, a monument to when tactical excellence met logistical reality and lost. Visitors ask why such powerful tanks were abandoned. The answer: no fuel. In industrial warfare, that was the only answer that mattered. On December 17, 1944, at a small Belgian crossroads, Joachim Peiper discovered 50,000 gallons of abandoned American fuel. It seemed like salvation. Within hours, watching 2 million gallons burn at Stavelot, he understood it was a revelation of doom. Germany hadn't just run out of fuel, it had run out of hope, defeated by an enemy who could burn oceans while Germany begged for drops. The lesson echoes through history. In modern warfare between industrial powers, the side that counts fuel by the gallon will always lose to the side that measures it by the million. Peiper learned this truth in Belgium's frozen forests, abandoned his tanks, and walked away from a war that was already over, defeated not by American tactics, but by American abundance. The abandoned tanks at La Gleize became more than relics. They became symbols of a fundamental shift in warfare. For centuries, military theorists from Sun Tzu to Clausewitz had focused on strategy, tactics, and the warrior spirit. Peiper's empty fuel gauges proved that in the industrial age, logistics had become strategy, and production capacity determined victory more than battlefield brilliance. In the decades following World War II, military planners worldwide internalized the lesson of December 1944. The Soviet Union, despite capturing German synthetic fuel technology, invested massively in natural petroleum reserves. The United States built the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, understanding that fuel security was national security. Even small nations learned that in modern warfare, a steady supply of fuel mattered more than elite troops. The human stories behind the statistics were human tragedies that illustrated the fuel crisis's impact. Unteroffizier Klaus Wagner, a tank commander in Peiper's unit, kept a diary that survived the war. December 18th. Found an American fuel dump, cases of rations, chocolate, cigarettes. The men gorged themselves, but I noticed something else. Americans had left vehicles running just to keep warm. We haven't had fuel for heaters since November. They waste more keeping comfortable than we get for combat. December 20th. Past a German field hospital, no fuel for ambulances. Wounded, lying in the snow. American planes overhead constantly. They burn more fuel in one sortie than my company has seen in months. December 23rd. Orders to destroy our tank. My beautiful Panther, never defeated in battle. We drained the last drops of fuel to burn our personal effects. The Americans will find only empty shells, like us. Medical Officer Hauptmann Dr. Friedrich Bauer testified after the war about the fuel shortage's medical impact. We had morphine, sulfa, bandages, everything but fuel. I watched men die who needed only a 20-kilometer ride to a surgical hospital. We had horse-drawn ambulances passing abandoned American trucks. It was medical practice from 1870, fighting a 1944 war. The industrial multiplication effect. What Peiper discovered went beyond simple numbers. American industrial philosophy multiplied every advantage. Standardization. Every American truck used the same parts. Every tank ran on the same fuel. German forces operated French Samuas, Czech Panzers, captured Soviet T-34s, each requiring different parts, different maintenance, different fuel grades. Redundancy. Americans built backup systems for their backup systems. If one pipeline failed, trucks took over. If trucks were destroyed, aircraft delivered fuel. Germans had single-point failures everywhere. Waste acceptance. American doctrine accepted 20% waste as the price of abundance. Germans, trained in scarcity, couldn't conceive of deliberately wasting resources. This psychological difference proved decisive. Speed over efficiency, the red ball. Express was monumentally wasteful. Trucks running constantly, engines wearing out, fuel consumed moving fuel. But it delivered. German efficiency-focused logistics couldn't match American wasteful abundance. The myths shattered Peiper's discovery, shattered several Nazi myths simultaneously. Racial superiority. The SS, supposedly the racial elite, was reduced to siphoning fuel from abandoned American vehicles driven by racially integrated units. American abundance included black truck drivers delivering more fuel than German Aryans could imagine. European sophistication. Germans had prided themselves on cultural sophistication versus American materialism. But when panzers sat empty while American Shermans rolled past, cultural superiority meant nothing. Quality over quantity. German tanks were technically superior, better armor, bigger guns, superior optics. None of it mattered with empty fuel tanks. American quantity had its own quality. Professional versus amateur armies. The Wehrmacht considered itself the world's most professional military. But American amateur citizen soldiers had mastered industrial warfare, while German professionals still thought in Napoleonic terms. The letters home. Captured German mail from December 1944 revealed how widely Peiper's discovery resonated. The Feldpost, military mail, censors, overwhelmed by the Ardennes offensive, let through letters that normally would have been blocked. Gefreiter Hans Müller to his wife. The Americans have so much fuel, they burn it to deny it to us. We measure by the liter what they waste by the thousands. How can we win against such wealth? Obergefreiter Kurt Hoffmann to his mother. Yesterday saw American depot burning. More fuel destroyed than our division has received all year. The war is lost, Mother. We are fighting American factories, not soldiers. Lieutenant Friedrich Schmidt to his father. They say we are superior soldiers, perhaps, but they leave trucks running for warmth while we march. They fly supplies while we use horses. Being a superior soldier means nothing against unlimited resources. These letters, multiplied thousands of times, spread defeatism more effectively than any Allied propaganda. German soldiers hadn't just discovered American material superiority. They discovered its magnitude was beyond their ability to overcome. The view from the other side. American soldiers, ironically, were often unaware of their overwhelming advantage. Private First Class Donald Peterson, 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, helped destroy the Stavelot Depot. In a 1994 interview, he recalled, "We were ordered to burn the fuel dump. Seemed like a terrible waste. All that gasoline going up in smoke. We grumbled about it. Nobody told us the Germans were desperate for fuel. We thought they had plenty of everything like we did. Finding out later they were counting individual jerry cans while we burned millions. It was surreal." Technical Sergeant Roy Williams, Red Ball Express. "We complained constantly about the waste. Trucks running 24 hours, burning out engines, throwing away parts instead of fixing them. Then I met German POWs who told me their tanks sat empty for weeks. Made me realize complaining about waste was a luxury they couldn't imagine." Captain James Morrison, 44th Quartermaster Company. "My biggest problem was too much fuel, storage tanks overflowing, no place to put incoming shipments. I actually refused delivery once, told them to take it to another depot. After the war, learned Germans would have fought a battle for what I turned away." The technical reality. The fuel crisis exposed fundamental differences in American and German war machines. German Tiger tank, fuel consumption 2.5 gallons per mile, road 5 gallons per mile, combat. Range 60 miles road, 30 miles cross country. Fuel capacity 160 gallons. Required high-grade gasoline. American Sherman tank, fuel consumption 0.8 gallons per mile, road 1.5 gallons per mile, combat. Range 150 miles road, 100 miles cross country. Fuel capacity 175 gallons. Ran on regular gasoline. The German tank was superior in armor and firepower, but it needed 3 times more fuel to go half the distance. In a war of movement, this proved fatal. The ripple effects. Peiper's fuel crisis had effects beyond the immediate battle. Luftwaffe grounding. Aircraft allocated for ground support were grounded to save fuel for tanks. This gave Americans total air superiority, making daylight movement suicidal. Artillery limitations. German artillery, excellent in quality, was limited by inability to move. Fuel shortages meant guns couldn't relocate after firing, making them vulnerable to counter-battery fire. Infantry exhaustion. With no fuel for trucks, German infantry marched. By the time they reached objectives, they were exhausted, while American infantry arrived fresh via truck. Medical catastrophe. Fuel shortages meant wounded weren't evacuated promptly. German casualty rates included thousands who died from treatable wounds due to transport delays. Communication breakdown. Radio units required generators. Generators required fuel. German communications increasingly relied on runners. 19th century solutions to 20th century problems. The final reconnaissance. On December 26th, American reconnaissance flights over the abandoned German positions found a remarkable sight. Hundreds of vehicles, intact and unmarked by combat, simply abandoned. Photo interpreters initially suspected a trap. It took prisoner interrogations to confirm the simple truth. They'd run out of fuel. Major Thomas Harrison, photo intelligence officer. We'd never seen anything like it. Entire armored columns just stopped, crews walking away. No battle damage, no mechanical failures we could see, just empty fuel tanks. It was victory by logistics. The abandoned equipment inventory was staggering. 39 tanks, Tigers and Panthers, 70 half-tracks, 177 trucks and cars, 18 self-propelled guns, 31 towed artillery pieces, total value approximately 50 million Reichsmarks of equipment, defeated by absent fuel. The psychological aftermath. For German veterans, the fuel crisis became a defining trauma. In post-war interviews, Ardennes veterans consistently cited fuel shortages as their most vivid memory. Former Sturmbannführer Otto Kuhm. Not the cold, not the Americans, not the artillery. The empty fuel gauge. That's what I remember. Watching the needle drop, knowing when it hit empty, we were finished. Former Hauptmann Ernst Deutsch. I'd fought in Russia, seen Stalingrad, but watching Americans burn fuel we'd die for, that broke something in me. You can fight enemy soldiers. You can't fight enemy wealth. Former Oberst Hermann Priest. We'd trained for every contingency except one. What to do when the enemy has unlimited resources and you have none. There's no tactical solution to that problem. The lessons for modern warfare. Military academies worldwide still study Peiper's fuel crisis as a fundamental lesson in logistics. West Point Study, 1975. The German Ardennes offensive demonstrates that tactical excellence cannot overcome logistical failure. Kampfgruppe Peiper possessed superior training, equipment, and leadership. None of it mattered without fuel. Soviet General Staff Study, 1955. The American solution to warfare, overwhelming material superiority, proves more reliable than German operational artistry. Production capacity becomes military capability. British Staff College Analysis, 1960. Peiper's experience demonstrates that in industrial warfare, the side that counts resources loses to the side that doesn't need to count. The corporate world takes notice. Business schools discovered parallels between military logistics and corporate supply chains. Peiper's fuel crisis became a case study in resource management. Harvard Business School case, 1962. The German Army in 1944 represents a technically superior organization defeated by a competitor with superior supply chain management. Excellence in operations cannot overcome fundamental resource constraints. Toyota Production System. Japanese industrialists studied American World War II logistics, particularly the willingness to accept waste for reliability. This influenced Toyota's focus on supply chain redundancy over pure efficiency. FedEx Foundation. Fred Smith explicitly cited World War II logistics, including German fuel shortages, as inspiration for overnight delivery. The Americans proved you could move anything, anywhere. if you accepted the cost. The environmental irony. Modern environmentalists note a dark irony in the Ardennes fuel crisis. The 8 million gallons Americans destroyed would be considered an environmental catastrophe today. Yet that destruction helped end a war that was consuming far more resources daily. Dr. Rachel Morrison, environmental historian. The Stavelot Depot burning put roughly 60,000 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. Significant by today's standards, but the war was consuming 10 times that amount daily. Environmental destruction to end greater destruction, a paradox of industrial warfare. The veteran's perspective. At a 1994 reunion marking the battle's 50th anniversary, American and German veterans met at L'Église. The conversations revealed how deeply the fuel crisis had affected both sides. Former Sergeant William Davis, 291st Engineers. I helped burn Stavelot. Always felt guilty about the waste. Then Otto here tells me his tank ran dry 10 miles away. If we hadn't burned it, he might have reached the Meuse. Former Unterscharführer Otto Bergman. You Americans never understood what you had. We'd kill for 100 gallons. You burned millions. It wasn't fair. He paused. But war isn't fair. You had oil wells. We had coal. You played your advantages. The reunion's most poignant moment came when veterans examined Peiper's abandoned Tiger tank, still displayed at L'Église. Former Panzer crewmen explained to Americans how they drain fuel from damaged tanks, measure it by the liter, sometimes fight over individual jerry cans. American veteran James Thompson responded, "We complained if we only got 90% of our fuel requisition. You were fighting over drops while we were swimming in it. No wonder you lost." The numbers that mattered. In the end, the Ardennes offensive's failure can be reduced to simple arithmetic. German calculations. Fuel needed for offensive, 4.5 million gallons. Fuel allocated, 5 million gallons. Fuel delivered, 2.5 million gallons. Fuel captured, 100,000 gallons. Total available, 2.6 million gallons. Deficit, 1.9 million gallons. American reality, daily fuel consumption, December 1944, 7.5 million gallons. Daily fuel delivery, 8.2 million gallons. Fuel destroyed to deny capture, 8+ million gallons. Fuel in reserve, 35+ million gallons. Fuel production capacity, essentially unlimited. The Germans were trying to run an offensive on what Americans consumed in 8 hours. The final judgment. Joachim Peiper, in his last interview before his death in 1976, offered a soldier's epitaph for the fuel crisis. We were magnificent anachronisms, knights in armor fighting an enemy who had replaced honor with oil wells. At Honsfeld, I thought we'd found salvation. By Stavelot, I knew we'd found our doom. The Americans didn't defeat us. American oil defeated us. There's a difference, but it didn't matter to my empty tanks. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, asked after the war, what defeated Germany, answered with one word, oil. Pressed to elaborate, he said, America floated to victory on a sea of oil. We drowned in its absence. Albert Speer in his memoirs wrote, when I learned Peiper had captured 50,000 gallons, a fortune by our standards, pocket change by American, I knew the war was over. You cannot fight an enemy who measures in millions what you measure in thousands. Conclusion: The empty tank as monument. Today, Peiper's Tiger tank remains at L'Église, its fuel gauge forever on empty, the perfect monument to December 1944's truth. Tourists photograph it, historians study it, veterans remember it. But its real significance lies in what it represents, the moment when war's industrial nature became undeniable. That Tiger tank, with its superior armor and devastating 88mm gun, sits forever immobilized by an empty fuel tank. All its technical excellence, crew training, and tactical doctrine meant nothing without fuel. It embodies the lesson Peiper learned among the jerry cans at Honsfeld. In industrial warfare, logistics is strategy, production is power, and abundance defeats excellence. Every modern military has internalized this lesson. Wars are won in factories and refineries, not just battlefields. The side that counts fuel by the gallon loses to the side that measures by the million. Peiper discovered this truth on a frozen Belgian morning, watching Americans casually abandon what Germany desperately needed. The Ardennes offensive failed not because German soldiers lacked courage or skill, but because they lacked fuel. In the end, empty fuel tanks defeated the Third Reich as surely as any army. The abandoned vehicles of Kampfgruppe Peiper stand as monuments to industrial warfare's fundamental truth. In modern conflict, petroleum is power, logistics is life, and the army with the most fuel wins. December 17, 1944. Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper found 50,000 gallons of abandoned American fuel. For a brief moment, it seemed like salvation. Within days, watching millions burn rather than fall into German hands, he understood it was a glimpse of inevitable defeat. Germany hadn't just run out of fuel, it had run out of future, defeated by American abundance it couldn't match, couldn't counter, and ultimately couldn't even comprehend. The war ended, not with a bang, but with a sputter, the sound of German engines dying for lack of fuel, while American motors roared on, powered by an ocean of oil that washed away the Third Reich's dreams of conquest. In the forests of the Ardennes, among empty jerry cans and abandoned tanks, the age of industrial warfare reached its logical conclusion. The side with the most oil won. It was that simple and that terrible. December 17, 1944, 0530 hours. Honsfeld, Belgium. The Tiger tank's engine coughed, sputtered, then died. Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the turret hatch, the metallic clang echoing through the pre-dawn darkness. His driver, Unterscharführer Weber, attempted to restart the 700-horsepower Maybach engine. Nothing. The fuel gauge read empty. Herr Oberst, Sturmbannführer Weber called up from his compartment, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The reserve tank is also dry. Peiper climbed down from his command tank, his boots crunching on the frozen Belgian soil. Around him, the most powerful armored spearhead the Wehrmacht had assembled for Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Ardennes offensive, sat motionless. 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's most elite Waffen-SS soldiers, all paralyzed by empty fuel tanks. Through the morning mist, Peiper could see the abandoned American position ahead. Honsfeld, a critical supply depot for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. The Americans had fled so quickly they'd left fires still burning in oil drums, coffee still hot in metal cups, and there, lined up like a gift from the god of war himself, stood rows upon rows of jerry cans, thousands of them, the distinctive olive-drab American fuel containers. Peiper approached slowly, almost reverently. His adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Grubel, pried open one can and sniffed. Benzin, Herr Obersturmbannführer, high-octane gasoline. As his men began the frantic work of refueling their vehicles, Peiper walked among the stockpile, counting. The mathematics was staggering. 50,000 gallons, enough to fuel his entire Kampfgruppe for the push to the Meuse River, enough to potentially change the course of the offensive. The Americans had abandoned more fuel in this single depot than most German divisions had received in the past 6 months. But as Peiper stood among this bounty, watching his men pour American fuel into German tanks, a crushing realization settled over him like the morning fog. If the Americans could afford to abandon such quantities, if they could leave behind what Germany would guard with entire divisions, then this war was already over. Germany hadn't just miscalculated. Germany had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of its enemy, the mathematics of defeat. 6 months before Peiper's discovery at Honsfeld, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had presented the Führer with a report that should have ended all offensive operations immediately. Germany's synthetic fuel production, the lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, had been systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. The Leuna Works, which had produced 175,000 tons of fuel in April, managed only 5,000 tons by September. The Politz hydrogenation plants at Brooks, Berlin, and Seitz were operating at less than 10% capacity. The numbers told a story of inevitable defeat. In 1944, the United States produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, including all synthetic production and captured Romanian fields, managed 33 million barrels, less than 2% of American production. The Third Reich was attempting to wage mechanized warfare with horse-drawn logistics, while America was drowning its armies in petroleum abundance. Major Friedrich Zimmermann of the Wehrmacht Logistics Command had calculated that the Ardennes offensive would require 4.5 million gallons of fuel to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 5 million gallons, but only half was actually delivered due to transportation problems. The German High Command was betting the entire offensive on capturing enemy supplies, a strategy that revealed terminal weakness rather than strength. The Americans, meanwhile, had constructed a petroleum pipeline system across France called Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, and the Red Ball Express, a massive truck convoy system that delivered 12,500 tons of supplies daily to the front lines. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were consuming 1.2 million gallons of fuel per day and receiving 1.4 million gallons. They were accumulating reserves while fighting. The Spear Point's dilemma. Joachim Peiper was not a fool. At 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, veteran of the Eastern Front, where he had learned that in modern warfare, fuel was more precious than ammunition. His Kampfgruppe had been designated the Schwerpunkt, the decisive point of the entire Ardennes offensive. On December 14th, 3 days before the offensive, Peiper attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th Panzer Army, was blunt. "You will have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies." The fuel allocation for Kampfgruppe Peiper was 31,000 gallons, enough for 50 miles of combat operations. The distance to the Meuse was 65 miles. The mathematics of failure were built into the plan from the beginning. As his column prepared to advance on December 16th, Peiper issued strict orders. Tanks would operate in single file to conserve fuel. Engines would be shut off during any halt longer than 5 minutes. Capture of American fuel dumps was priority one, above even tactical objectives. The contrast with American operations could not have been starker. That same morning, Captain James Ross of the U.S. 743rd Tank Battalion, stationed just 20 miles from Peiper's starting position, recorded in his unit diary, "Received fuel resupply, 8,000 gallons, third delivery this week. Storage tanks already at capacity." The offensive begins December 16, 1944, 0530 hours. The German artillery barrage that opened Operation Watch on the Rhine used more ammunition in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had allocated for entire operations earlier in the war. But even this impressive display masked critical shortages. Peiper's column began moving at 0700, already behind schedule. The roads, which on German maps appeared as highways, were narrow country lanes, many unpaved. Within hours, traffic jams developed as vehicles designed for the Russian steppes struggled through the Ardennes forest. At Lanzerath, Peiper's first objective, they encountered unexpected resistance from a single American intelligence and reconnaissance platoon, 18 men who held up the most powerful German armored column for nearly 10 hours. During the delay, Peiper's vehicles sat idling, burning precious fuel. When they finally broke through and reached Honsfeld at dawn on December 17th, Peiper's column had covered 20 miles and consumed 40% of their fuel. At this rate, they would run dry before reaching the halfway point to the Meuse. The discovery that changed everything. The American supply depot at Honsfeld was not even a primary facility. It was a forward supply point for the 99th Infantry Division, what the U.S. Army classified as a Class 3 depot, a temporary fuel station. Yet what Peiper found there exceeded the monthly fuel allocation for an entire German panzer division. Hauptscharführer Grubel later testified, "We found pyramids of jerry cans, each containing 5 gallons of gasoline. They were stacked 3 meters high, extending for perhaps 200 meters. The Americans had not even attempted to destroy them." The captured fuel was high-octane aviation gasoline mixed with motor fuel, 80 octane or higher. German vehicles, especially the temperamental Maybach engines in the Tiger tanks, were designed for 74 octane fuel. The American gasoline was actually too good, causing engine problems in several German vehicles. As Peiper's men refueled, they made more discoveries. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann found shipping manifests in the depot office. He could read English, having worked in his father's import business before the war. The papers indicated this fuel had been shipped from Texas to New York, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, across the Channel to Normandy, and trucked 400 miles to Honsfeld. The journey of over 6,000 miles had taken less than 6 weeks. "I showed the papers to Obersturmbannführer Peiper," Hoffman recalled in a 1976 interview. "He read them twice, then crumpled them up. He said nothing, but his face went pale. We both understood what this meant." Private Ernst Keller found a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers dated December 15th, just 2 days old. The headline celebrated the opening of a new fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun, capable of delivering 300,000 gallons per day. A single pipeline delivering more fuel daily than Kampfgruppe Peiper would use in the entire offensive. Germany's fuel poverty. To comprehend the shock of Peiper's discovery, one must understand Germany's fuel situation by late 1944. Since May, Allied bombing had reduced synthetic fuel production by 90%. The Luftwaffe was grounding aircraft for lack of aviation fuel. Pilot training had been cut from 250 flight hours to 60 hours. The German Navy's surface fleet had effectively ceased operations. U-boats were fitted with snorkels to conserve diesel by running on batteries longer. On the home front, German civilians had not seen private automobile traffic since 1942. Gasoline was so precious that the Gestapo investigated black market theft of individual liters. Farmers were returning to horse-drawn plows. Meanwhile, the United States was producing 67% of the world's oil. The East Texas oil field alone produced more petroleum than all of German-occupied Europe. American refineries were operating at such capacity that Standard Oil was experimenting with new petroleum byproducts simply because they had excess crude. The race against empty tanks. With the 50,000 gallons captured at Honsfeld, Peiper's column surged forward. They reached Bullingen by noon on December 17th, capturing additional supplies, rations, ammunition, and most importantly, maps showing other American fuel depots in the area. But the maps revealed a disturbing truth. The Americans had fuel stockpiles everywhere. Every major crossroads had a depot. The U.S. First Army alone had 3.5 million gallons in reserve. Peiper pushed on to Malmedy, where his forces would commit the Malmedy massacre, killing 84 American prisoners. Even this war crime was connected to fuel desperation. Peiper later claimed he could not spare gasoline to transport prisoners. By evening on December 17th, Peiper's spearhead reached Stavelot, site of a major American fuel depot containing over 2 million gallons. Here was enough fuel to guarantee reaching the Meuse. But as the first German vehicles approached, American engineers were already at work. The inferno at Stavelot. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had received warning of the German approach. His orders were simple: deny fuel to the enemy at all costs. The Stavelot depot contained 189,000 gallons of gasoline in jerrycans stacked across 15 acres. At 16:30 on December 17th, as Peiper's advance guard approached, Captain Brewster gave the order. Engineers poured gasoline trails between the stacks. White phosphorus grenades were distributed. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis threw the first grenade, Brewster recalled. The explosion was immediate and tremendous. A wall of fire shot up maybe 100 feet. Within minutes, the entire depot was an inferno. Peiper's lead tanks arrived to find a pillar of black smoke rising 1,000 feet into the sky. The fire would burn for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered Peiper's entire division to Antwerp and back. Unterscharführer Weber described the scene. The Obersturmbannführer stood on his tank turret watching the flames. He said nothing for perhaps 5 minutes. Then he climbed down and told me, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons to deny them to us. What are we doing here?" The mathematics of abundance. Across the Ardennes, American engineers were destroying fuel dumps rather than risk capture. Bulge, 1.1 million gallons burned. Spa, 2.5 million gallons destroyed. Total. Americans deliberately destroyed over 8 million gallons during the first week, more than Germany had allocated for the entire offensive. The ability to casually destroy millions of gallons was rooted in a supply system beyond German comprehension. The Red Ball Express had delivered 412,000 tons of supplies using 6,000 trucks operating around the clock. Each truck consumed 40 gallons daily. The operation itself burned more fuel than German Army Group B received monthly. By December 1944, the Motor Transport Service employed 230 truck companies operating on color-coded routes. The system delivered 20,000 tons of supplies daily, including 3,000 tons of fuel. Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for 1st Army, recorded on December 18th. Fuel receipts yesterday, 1,847,000 gallons. Fuel issued, 1,623,000 gallons. Net gain to reserves, 224,000 gallons. The pipeline system was even more impressive. Operation Pluto had laid pipes across the English Channel, pumping 1 million gallons daily from Britain. The Cherbourg-Paris line delivered 800,000 gallons daily. The Seine-Verdun line moved 650,000 gallons daily. By December 1944, Allied forces in Northwest Europe were consuming 7.5 million gallons daily while receiving 8.2 million gallons. They were building reserves during offensive operations. The arithmetic of defeat. As Peiper pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18th, the impossibility of the German position became clear. At Chanou, they captured another depot, 5,000 gallons, consumed in 3 hours of combat. Tiger tanks consumed 2.5 gallons per mile in battle. Panthers burned 1.5 gallons per mile. In the difficult Ardennes terrain, consumption increased by 40%. Hauptmann Otto Dingler, maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded, "By noon on December 18th, we had consumed 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We had captured perhaps 55,000 gallons. We were operating at a deficit." The Americans, monitoring German radio traffic through ultra-intercepts, knew Peiper's fuel situation. General Courtney Hodges ordered all units. Enemy critically short of fuel. Destroy all gasoline stocks threatened by capture. That same day, American C-47s flew 316 sorties, delivering supplies to Bastogne, including 160,000 gallons of fuel. Americans were flying more fuel to a surrounded garrison than Peiper's entire Kampfgruppe possessed, immobilized by empty tanks. By December 19th, as Peiper's forces engaged defenders at Stoumont, the fuel crisis had become critical. Tanks were being abandoned with empty fuel tanks rather than from battle damage. Peiper consolidated his remaining fuel, perhaps 8,000 gallons, enough for one engagement or retreat, but not both. Meanwhile, Allied planners were preparing for January operations. Brigadier General Moses Eddy requested 245 million gallons for the coming month. The request was approved without discussion. The contrast extended beyond quantity. American vehicles were standardized for efficiency. Sherman tanks consumed 0.8 gallons per mile versus the Tiger's 2.5. American trucks got 8 miles per gallon, fully loaded. Parts were interchangeable, maintenance simplified. German forces operated a bewildering array of captured and manufactured vehicles with different requirements. French tanks needed different oil than German Panthers. Soviet trucks required different parts than German Opels. Each complication multiplied logistical difficulties. The end of the spear. On December 20th, Peiper received a radio message. Fuel convoy destroyed by Allied aircraft. No resupply possible. Continue with available resources. Peiper called his commanders together. Sturmbannführer Werner Poetschke was blunt. We have fuel for perhaps 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 kilometers away. According to Hauptsturmführer Grubel's testimony, the Obersturmbannführer said, "Gentlemen, we have discovered we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we receive for this entire operation. What we captured at Honsfeld, which seemed miraculous, was nothing to them. We cannot win." This realization was spreading. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army, later wrote, "When I learned Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons rather than risk us capturing it, I knew the offensive had failed before it began." Abandonment and escape. On the night of December 23rd, 24th, Peiper abandoned his vehicles and escaped on foot. Of 119 tanks and assault guns that began the offensive, 39 remained operational but immobilized. These were destroyed with remaining ammunition. Obergefreiter Heinz Goltz described the scene. "We drained the last fuel from all vehicles, maybe 200 gallons total. The Obersturmbannführer personally destroyed his command tank. Millions of Reichsmarks of equipment destroyed by empty fuel tanks. Of 5,000 men who began with Kampfgruppe Peiper, approximately 770 returned. They had advanced 60 miles, captured several depots, and discovered the truth about Allied logistics. The ripple effect. Through German command, news of Peiper's discovery spread rapidly through German command. On December 26th, Field Marshal Walter Model received reports on captured American supplies. His chief of staff recorded Model's reaction. The field marshal read the quantities twice: 50,000 gallons at Honsfeld, 2 million burned at Stavelot, 8 million destroyed rather than captured. He said, "We are not fighting the same war." Hitler, informed on December 28th, refused to accept reality. Speer wrote, "Hitler insisted the numbers were propaganda. When shown photographs of burning Stavelot, he claimed they were Hollywood effects." But lower ranks understood. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote his wife, "Americans destroy more fuel daily than we receive monthly. They drive tanks like we march. This war is lost." The broader context of industrial warfare. The fuel crisis was symptomatic of a larger truth. By 1944, America produced 50% of world manufacturing. A new aircraft every 5 minutes, a ship daily, a tank every 7 minutes. Petroleum production statistics were overwhelming. United States, 1.8 billion barrels. Soviet Union, 110 million barrels. Germany, including synthetic, 33 million barrels. Japan, 2.6 million barrels. The Axis combined produced less than 2% of American petroleum. Every major German offensive after 1942 had been constrained by fuel. Every American offensive was supported by abundance German planners couldn't conceive. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Hansen recorded a revealing incident on December 27th. A logistics officer reported weather had reduced fuel deliveries to only 500,000 gallons daily. There was concern until someone noted this exceeded Germany's total offensive allocation. The psychological impact. German POWs from the Ardennes were more shocked by American waste than firepower. Seeing GIs discard half-eaten rations or use gasoline for heating shattered morale more than artillery. Oberst Günther Reichhelm told interrogators, "We knew your production numbers abstractly, but seeing soldiers waste more than we possessed made them real. Every German who saw your casual abundance knew the war was hopeless." This knowledge spread through letters despite censorship. Feldwebel Ernst Müller wrote, "Americans wash clothes in gasoline. They feed chocolate to dogs. They fire artillery for Christmas celebrations. We cannot fight infinity." The psychological impact undermined German racial superiority narratives. How could decadent Americans possess such wealth while the master race scraped for necessities? The view from Nuremberg. During the Nuremberg trials, German leaders consistently cited logistics, particularly fuel, as decisive. Field Marshal Keitel testified, "We had operational superiority in 1941-42. By 1944, we couldn't move forces for lack of fuel, while Americans moved armies like chess pieces." Peiper, tried for the Malmedy massacre, offered revealing testimony. Every decision after December 17th was influenced by fuel shortage. We couldn't maneuver, pursue, or retreat effectively. Americans moved freely while we counted lighters. General Heinz Guderian wrote, "When Peiper captured 50,000 gallons, meaning everything to him but nothing to Americans, the war was over." The mathematics of industrial war. The story resonates because it represents when industrial warfare reached its conclusion. Wars were won by production statistics, not warrior courage. The romantic notion of warfare died in the Ardennes among empty fuel tanks. Dr. Richard Overy calculated that by 1944, Allied to Axis production ratios exceeded 5:1 in major categories. In petroleum, it approached 50.1. These advantages couldn't be overcome by superior training or tactics. Production figures tell the story. America produced 324,750 aircraft during the war. Germany, 119,907. Americans built 88,410 tanks. Germany, 46,857. Most tellingly, America refined 1.8 billion barrels of oil in 1944 alone, while Germany scraped together 33 million barrels. The moment of clarity, December 24, 1944. As Peiper's men slipped through American lines on foot, abandoning 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 107 other vehicles, the magnitude crystallized. They had captured 50,000 gallons, seemingly miraculous, only to learn it was meaningless to an enemy who could burn millions. Unterscharführer Weber reflected in 1975. That morning at Honsfeld, finding American fuel, we celebrated like winning the lottery. By evening, learning about Stavelot burning, we understood we'd already lost. Americans had so much they could destroy what we die to possess. The 50,000 gallons was less than a single American armored division consumed in 2 days, less than the Red Ball Express burned in 3 hours. A rounding error in Allied daily consumption, Major General J. Lawton Collins later wrote, Germans' desperate attempts to capture fuel revealed their miscalculation. They assumed we valued fuel as they did, as irreplaceable. They couldn't comprehend we had so much we could burn millions rather than risk tactical disadvantage. The final accounting operation, Watch on the Rhine, failed through immutable mathematics of industrial warfare. The offensive consumed approximately 2.8 million gallons, 40% over allocation, the difference from captured supplies. During the same period, Americans consumed 267 million gallons, nearly 100 times more. The Wehrmacht lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, 1,000 aircraft. But most devastating was loss of illusions. Every German witnessing American abundance understood Germany wasn't fighting a war, but participating in its own execution. Personal aftermath. Joachim Peiper survived imprisoned until 1956 for war crimes. On July 14, 1976, he was murdered at his French home by unknown assailants. But in 1967, he told historian Henry Leomont, "Finding that depot was the worst thing. If we'd run out earlier, we might have retreated with dignity. Instead, we discovered Americans had oceans while we had drops. We discovered impossibility." The broader lesson. The lesson extends beyond World War II. In industrial warfare, logistics supersedes tactics, production overwhelms courage, abundance defeats dedication. The German soldier of 1944 was arguably better trained, more experienced. It didn't matter. Americans were backed by an industrial machine that could waste more than Germany could produce. This truth was encoded in every jerry can at Honsfeld, every gallon burned at Stavelot, every pipeline across France. Wars between industrial powers would be won by factories and refineries, not brilliant generals. Colonel Trevor Dupuy calculated that in December 1944, each American soldier was supported by 67 pounds of supplies daily. Each German received 3 pounds. Americans complained about waste. Germans would have considered American waste unimaginable abundance. The museum at La Glaise. In 1984, 40 years after the battle, veterans gathered at La Glaise. The museum displays Peiper's Tiger tank still positioned where it ran out of fuel on December 23, 1944. Former Unterscharführer Weber stood beside the tank with former Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the 30th Infantry Division. "We always wondered why you stopped," Anderson said. "We thought it was tactical." Weber laughed bitterly. "We stopped because tanks were empty. You burned millions to keep it from us. How could we fight that?" Anderson was quiet, then said, "We never knew you were that short. We had so much. We never thought about it. That exchange captured December 1944's truth. One side measured by the gallon, the other by millions. One fought for each jerry can, the other burned oceans. The outcome was predetermined. The documentary evidence German records provide damning evidence. Army Group B's War Diary, December 1944, December 16th. Offensive begins. Fuel 70% of minimum. December 17th. Peiper captures 50,000 gallons. December 18th. Multiple depots destroyed. 5+ million gallons lost. December 19th. Fuel critical. Units immobilized. December 24th. Peiper abandons vehicles. Fuel exhaustion. Meanwhile, First Army reports. December 16th. Reserves 3.7 million gallons. December 17th. 2.2 million destroyed. December 18th. 1.8 million received December 24th. Reserves 4.1 million. Americans treated millions with indifference. Germans treasured individual cans. Technological superiority. Beyond quantity, American fuel represented technological superiority. American refineries perfected catalytic cracking, producing higher octane more efficiently than German hydrogenation. American 100-octane aviation fuel gave aircraft performance advantages over German planes running 87-octane. Synthetic Americans perfected additives. Germany couldn't replicate. Tetraethyl lead, ethylene dibromide, detergents. German engines, designed for lower quality, often ran poorly on captured American gasoline. The human cost fuel shortage shaped every soldier's experience. Gefreiter Hans Müller recorded December 20th. Marched 30 kilometers, no fuel for trucks, past abandoned American vehicles with engines running for warmth. They leave engines running. We march through snow. Medical services were crippled. Ambulances couldn't evacuate wounded. Hospitals couldn't run generators. Men died waiting for transportation that never came. Oberarzt Dr. Wilhelm Kersting testified, "We had excellent surgeons, supplies captured from Americans, but no fuel for ambulances. Men died who could have been saved with 10 kilometers transport." The propaganda collapse. The discoveries shattered German propaganda about American weakness. Soldiers had been told Americans were soft, decadent, incapable. Then they discovered Americans could destroy more than Germany possessed. Goebbels' diary, December 28th. Reports indicate serious morale problems. Soldiers write about American superiority undermining our narrative. But stories spread faster than censorship. The myth of German superiority couldn't survive contact with American logistics. The strategic consequences. The Ardennes failure meant Germany had no options except desperate defense. General Jodl testified at Nuremberg, "After the Ardennes, we knew it was lost. We'd played our last card and discovered the enemy held all aces." Recognizing German desperation, Allies focused on destroying fuel production. By February 1945, German fuel production ceased. The Luftwaffe was grounded. Training canceled. The Wehrmacht became static, destroyed piecemeal by mobile enemies. Spring 1945 brought surreal scenes. German units surrendered from immobility, not defeat. Entire panzer divisions sat helplessly as Allies drove past. General Major Fritz Bayerlein described, "We had 42 operational tanks, experienced crews, ammunition. We had 300 liters fuel, not enough for the next town. We destroyed our tanks and walked to captivity." Meanwhile, American advance was constrained only by traffic jams from vehicle abundance. Third Army alone had 15,000 vehicles. The ultimate irony Kampfgruppe Peiper's fuel crisis demonstrates how industrial capacity determined World War II's outcome. When Peiper stood among captured jerry cans that December morning, he glimpsed truth. They fought an enemy whose waste exceeded their need. The numbers tell everything. German offensive allocation, 5 million gallons. Fuel destroyed by Americans, 8 million gallons. Daily American consumption, 7.5 million gallons. Peiper's capture at Honsfeld, 50,000 gallons, percentage of American daily supply, 0.6%. The Battle of the Bulge killed 19,000 Americans, perhaps 100,000 Germans. It destroyed Wehrmacht last reserves. But its lasting impact was spreading knowledge through German ranks. America possessed incomprehensible abundance.